So Spinning Saint, still a long way clear, but running very wide and running off course. Spinning Saint has taken the wrong circuit. He's running down towards the first fence in the National, and his rider looking apprehensively over his left shoulder, so he's gone the wrong way altogether.
If anything can go wrong, it will.
I'm very confident. I have done this quite a few times, and it does stop.
With 32 tons of lorry
That's
encroaching
correct.
on you.
Not worried in the slightest.
No.
Not even looking.
We shall see.
Christ.
Quite fast up here. Uphill's a lot safer than downhill. You can stop a lot quicker, even in...
Murphy's Law triumphs again. Or does it? Murphy's Law has many different names. The law of natural cussedness, Sod's Law, and some of them not even repeatable. We all know the law, but is it true? Nobody's ever tested it scientifically, and that's exactly what we're going to do for the first time ever. It's about time that we scientists did something about things which really affect the citizens who pay our salaries. Because if we know that whatever can go wrong will, then we can try to do something about it. And our inquiry hasn't cost millions of pounds either. Here on the banks of the River Tyne, I brought together a group of scientific colleagues from the University of Newcastle to help me investigate Murphy's Law. It hasn't been easy. We had to settle for one of the university's least impressive buildings as our research centre, but I suppose that we'll just have to regard that as a penalty of pioneering. So let's start with Murphy's first law. If anything can go wrong, it will. In the Black Museum of Life, this means that projects such as Concorde are never built to estimate. Everything takes twice as long and costs 4 times as much as the first price mentioned. Concorde spent 14 years between drawing board and scheduled flight and has cost 10 times its first quoted price. Dungeness B nuclear power station has consumed nearly £1.5 billion more than expected. A complete set of boilers had to be scrapped because it didn't fit the building. And the station itself took 20 years to finish. But the world record holder for delays is the Channel Tunnel, nearly 200 years overdue. And the tunnel now building will cost nearly double the first price suggested to see it through to its end. All these examples seem proof enough of Murphy's Law, but they don't help us to test it. What is testable is Murphy's cheerful assertion that the bread always falls butter side down. To check this section of the law, my colleague, physicist Dr. Lindsay Molyneux, who normally spends his time building magnetometers, has designed and built for us a bread and butter throwing machine. Lindsay, who has an interestingly organised workshop, joined us in the spirit you would expect of a past finalist in the Great Egg Race series. His first design knocked the bread to the ground using a typewriter carriage.
Well, the brief I was given was going to test Murphy's Law, and I thought we ought to have a random element in it, and that comes from the bread itself. Bread's far from uniform. It's the shape and the density and the modulus rigidity will all be different. And we'd make sure we had standard starting conditions. So this was the first effort.
Not bad.
It's a start, it's a start. And then somebody said, well, why not use a toaster? Well, why not, indeed? So we've got this toaster here, a piece of bread, and, well, it's all right, but don't forget we're testing bread and butter. And we would have had butter on this, and it would have been heated up, and it would have got a lovely mess all in there, and it would have caught fire as well. So we thought on the whole not. So, but working along those lines and keeping the starting conditions the same, we thought, why not use a solenoid? We've got one here, and a piece of bread here, and a driver for it, and I'll just operate it for you.
That's pathetic.
Yes, I'm afraid so.
What's that for?
Stop poking your eye out. Easily done. All this gave us the necessary experience to really design Slice, which is Sod's Law Index cunningly examined.
Bread sticks to the throwing platform if it's buttered, so it was marked instead to indicate its butter side. The results were totally unexpected. When the slices were placed with their longer axis this way on the launch platform, the bread landed equally, butter side up and down. Murphy's Law wasn't working. But when it was fired from this position, 3 times out of 4, it landed butter side up, which made Murphy's Law the opposite of true. Our project statistician is Dr. David Appleton.
A weaker man might be moved to re-examine his faith, at least in the law of probability, if he saw 3/4 of the results coming down butter side up. But a statistician looks at the experiment as a whole to see what's gone wrong.
Maybe the machine's uniform throw favours flipping bread the wrong way.
The way bread spins when you toss it is rather strange. If you spin it this way, everything seems just as you'd expect. If you spin it this way, again, what else would you expect? It spins. But if you spin it this way, it twists around in the air. Physics will tell you that this happens, and this may explain some of the results from the bread tossing experiment with the machine.
Our results certainly made us realise that we got off on the wrong foot. Maybe it was partly because we weren't actually using butter on the bread, but the real mistake was that we'd forgotten that Murphy's Law applies to people and not machines. We needed to do the tests all over again, but this time with human beings tossing the bread and butter.
Now, this experiment has been very carefully designed to test Murphy's Law in its expression that the bread always falls butter side down. So we want you to take a loaf of bread each, thinly butter each slice to save the butter, and then to give it a chance to fall either way, throw it up in the air and let it fall to the ground, and note carefully whether it fell butter side up or down.
This isn't the only bread test we did. The other tests link to Murphy's second and third laws, and I'll give the combined results in my final report. For the moment, we're staying with the first law. As part of predicting that things will go wrong, it notes that the other cue always moves faster, even if you change cues. Here's the inner lane moving gently. I'm in the outer one, of course. So I'm going to try to get an inside lane if they'll let me in. I have a problem here. Yeah. Chap in the blue van is reluctant to let me squeeze in. Here we go, squeezing our way in. And of course, now that I've changed into the lane that's moving faster, you can see very briskly the outside lane has released its jam and it's away faster than others. We've all been driven mad this way. But how often does it really happen in queues? Our experimenters carried stopwatches as well as shopping bags. Even in this reenactment, Murphy couldn't resist making a convenient plastic bag, well, less convenient. After shoppers gathered all they wanted off the shelves, they moved to the checkout area and joined the queue they thought was likely to be quickest. They also kept an eye on what they thought was the next best queue and timed the speed of both of them. The results show that every time our queue moved faster, it was matched by another time when it moved slower. The law doesn't work for queues, so why do we think it does? David Appleton.
Usually, when a shopper has finished going through the checkout, he or she ignores the other queue. So winning by a long margin is never noted, but losing is. Also, the results show that in about 1 case in 10, the other queue will win by 2 minutes or more, and those are the times that we remember.
The first law scores a miss, but we aren't finished with it yet. Have you ever noticed when you go to the cinema or theatre, people who arrive after you've got settled climb all over your legs? Murphy's Law knows the problem. People with seats in the centre, it says, arrive last. Well, we all know that's true, don't we? London's South Bank is the home of the National Film Theatre. Its cinemas have different designs. We checked both of them. Seats in both theatres are bookable, so members of the audience know where they must sit. We counted as latecomers anyone who arrived after the advertised start of the film. In the cinema with a single aisle, over a range of showings, the seats where the late arrivals sat were here. The other theatre has 2 aisles. This is what happened there. Whether people do have to climb over other people's legs to take their seats is not pictorially clear from their seat positions, but statistics prove that they don't.
I've analysed the results on the theatre data by the Kolmogorov-Smirnov test. I used to use chi-squared for these analyses till I discovered Kolmogorov-Smirnov. The results show that the small number of extra disturbances is attributable to chance and not to Murphy's Law.
Failure made us wonder if people from other countries know of the law. Could it be a wrong-headed idea held only by English-speaking nations? Language Lab students at the University of Newcastle reassured us. This is Spanish. It's when we're really short of room that grandmother gives birth to twins. Move east across Europe and Murphy grows 4 legs. The Czechs say, while running away from a bear, you meet a wolf. What about Romanian?
Fututa și cu banii luați. Fututa și cu banii luați.
That's totally obscene. Let's move rapidly on to the Turks.
İnsanın işi ters gitmeye görsün. Elma yerken kırılır dişi.
When things are going well, you can break your tooth eating an apple. Next, Korean.
뒤로 넘어져도 곱게 진다. 뒤로 넘어져도 곱게.
Even if you fall on your back, you break your nose. Last, Japanese. It is when you already have tears in your eyes that bees sting you. Murphy in Japanese surely wins for sheer elegance. But why call the law after Murphy when it's traditionally named Sod's Law? The new name first appeared in America in 1949. Here at Wright Field, the US Air Force Medical Lab was firing a huge sledge along a track at several hundred miles an hour and then stopping it suddenly. Major John Paul Stapp took hair-raising rides on the sledge. Wright Field's idea was to find out how pilots could survive air crashes. And working on the tests was Captain Ed Murphy. But our search for him soon ran into resistance from his own law. Murphy was not available. the tests weren't done here at Wright Field, but far away in California. Original film of the sledge has been destroyed. Only this fuzzy copy survives. Exciting, though not much help. But George Nichols, who worked on the rocket tests, recalls how Ed Murphy was upset when gauges which monitored the sledge at speed were wrongly wired back at Wright Field.
So we rewired them and wrapped them back up and got them ready for the next morning. And when Stapp and Colonel Murphy came out, or Captain Murphy came out, we explained what had happened and what was wrong with them. And he was muttering about a technician at Wright Field that if there was any way of doing something wrong, he would do it wrong. Well, at the project at that time, we had a hobby of naming laws and coming up with all sorts of laws. We had a Stapp's Ironical Paradox, and we had a Nichols law and a few other laws. So we decided the next day or so that that should be Murphy's Law. And the one we were using around there is, if it can happen, it will happen.
Major Stapp survived no fewer than 26 rides on the sledge.
Ed Murphy and his wife were living on the base, and he had some work to do for us. And nothing he attempted to do ever came out right. At a meeting of the Human Factors Engineering Society of Los Angeles, I referred to this situation and said that we had come up with Murphy's Law. If anything can go wrong, it will.
These tests continue today and have led to safety belts in cars. Major Stapp also told the press that the project had ways of avoiding accidents.
They wanted an explanation. How come you can do that? And he said, well, we're great believers in Murphy's Law, and we spent a lot of time trying to make sure it can't happen. Nobody had ever heard of Murphy's Law, so he had to explain it and quoted it. And within a couple of months, it just went like wildfire in the publications where companies were selling products and trying to hype their reliability and quality, and they were starting to use Murphy's Law and all the efforts that they were doing to eliminate it and so on. And that's where Murphy's Law just took off in the publications and went like wildfire.
Murphy's second law soon appeared. It states that things go wrong even when they can't. The Murphy concept is probably as old as the pharaohs. So it's only right that the best demonstration of things going wrong, even when they can't, dates back to ancient Egypt. The Great Pyramid has stood for thousands of years because pyramids cannot fall down. But Murphy disagrees. Another way the impossible happens is more up to date.
Well, have a go at this one.
It says that child-proof containers are really adult-proof.
It's worse again. I can't do nothing with these.
It's a new one.
Oh. I can't get it. No.
Are the containers the same unbeatable challenge for children? These bottles have pressed down and turned lids. All our containers are empty to avoid the risk of accidents. With this bottle, you squeeze the soft plastic cap to release it. And these fool the adults. You have to line up a couple of arrows before the cap can be pushed off. So, bring on the children. There's no cheating here. Katie wasn't allowed to see the containers before she was turned loose on them. Katie opened 4 containers out of 6.
That one was easy.
Zach was more devastating. He took only 38 seconds to wipe out every container on the table. Where does that leave testing the second law? When Zach's performance shows exactly how we expect it to work. Things going wrong, even when they can't, means that bread should fall butter side down, even when it's impossible. Our testing was devilish. As each piece of bread was placed on the plate, we carefully turned it over and buttered it on the wrong side. The bread must surely now fall in a different way. But Murphy was in attendance. Well, how are you getting on?
Well, it's just fallen butter side down 5 times in a row.
Don't I recognise that accent? What's your name?
Murphy?
To any reasonable person, it would seem that buttering the bread on the wrong side must change the way it falls. But it doesn't. So where does that leave the third and final law? This says that if things don't go wrong on their own, other people or events will make them go wrong. Other people make your life harder, whether deliberately or not. Look what's happened here. It could be that a reason for paranoia is that they really are out to get you. If it is true that you can rely on other people to make things go wrong, it must also be true that as the number of people on a committee goes up, the length of its meetings increases.
Mr. Ricketts, would you like to speak to the question of the insurance of the war memorial? I know it's a matter that you...
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I noted that both the memorials, which are so different, both in construction and position, are insured.
We studied the minutes of the parish council at Cookham in Berkshire.
War Memorial at Cookham Dean is so vulnerable it could be completely destroyed on a foggy night, and I wonder if something's never happened to it before.
Well, Mr. Chairman, it's not the...
The length of all the council's committee and subcommittee meetings is recorded in its minutes, going back for many years.
As I say, the relative risk is neither here nor there. That's not our concern, that's the insurance.
Analysis of the council's records proves that, at long last, it's one up to Murphy. David Appleton.
With the subcommittees, each additional member adds on average a minute to the length of the meeting. With the full committee, each member adds a minute and a half. So you can imagine that with a committee of 650 members, like the House of Commons, the possibilities are catastrophic. No wonder MPs don't turn up for meetings. If they did, the House would never finish its business.
It might perhaps be prudent to have the F&GP take another look at this policy and maybe make a suggestion to the next meeting. Would that be a sensible way?
The third law's mess you about principle suggests also that the damage caused when Murphy strikes is always as bad as possible. So the likelihood of bread falling butter side downwards should rise as the floor covering it drops on becomes more expensive. You may think that the sight of a dozen perfectly normal people on a croquet lawn dropping slices of bread on a carpet beats the Mad Hatter's tea party. Don't be deceived. These are historic experiments. They reveal Murphy's 3 laws for the first time in the light of science. The first law says simply that the bread always falls butter side downwards. It doesn't. In our tests, it fell butter side up 152 times and down 148 times, a completely even split. The second law suggests that buttering the bread on the wrong side reverses the results of the first test. It isn't so. In our second experiment, the bread fell butter side up 148 times and down 152 times. Yet another 50-50 split. The third law proposes that bread falls butter down more often if the floor covering is expensive. It doesn't. Butter side up came in at 156 times and down at 144 times. The same balance result as the first two tests. David Appleton.
The results of the bread tossing experiment give us absolutely no evidence at all that Murphy's Law is true. I know I won't be very popular for showing that these experiments imply that Murphy's Law doesn't exist. But perhaps, if it does exist, it's all in the mind. Murphy's Law is a psychological law. But there is another explanation, and that is, perhaps, if Murphy's Law is true, when we set out to test it, it operates on our experiments. All our experiments go wrong, and we end up showing that Murphy's Law isn't true. Perhaps you never can prove Murphy's Law.
So the world's game isn't rigged against us. Our scientific tests prove that Murphy's Law doesn't hold. But that's very confusing because the equally scientific laws of thermodynamics suggest that Murphy's right. In everyday English, they state that with the energy system of our universe, you can't win, you can't break even either, and you can't get out of the game.
Fate questo in memoria di me.
Maybe only religion and philosophy have seen deep enough below the surface of reality to be able to formulate ideas directly opposed to Murphy. All of humanity's major theories on the right way to live do actually fit with our denial of Murphy's Law. Capitalism says that you can win, socialism says that you can break even, and religion says that you can leave the game, or rather that when you die, you move on to another game somewhere else. But whether Murphy is right or wrong, there's one clear message to be taken away. The spectacularly dangerous American rocket sledge tests show that when it comes to our own safety, we need to behave as if Murphy is right.
T-minus 15 seconds and counting.
Amazingly, there hasn't been a major accident on this track in 40 years. Safety has come from attention to tiny detail.
1, 0, fire, +1.
There's one true lesson from Murphy's Law. You can't be too careful.
We did no runs on Mondays because our crew coming from being at home in Los Angeles might not be too reliable. I was very aware of human factors. We did none on Friday because they were thinking of going home. On Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, we did all of our experiments very safely because everybody's head was in the game. And that was the first policy. Watch out for people-generated Murphy's Law errors. They can be fatal.